All right, you mentioned Joe Sacco as we transition now to talking about the new interim head coach of the Bruins. Before we get into that conversation, let's hear a little bit of what he had to say.
Well, I think a lot of it is a mindset right now with our group. Certainly, we need to bring that out of them. And one thing that we're going to focus on is being a harder team to play against. And when I say that, I mean just stingier. We need to do a better job in front of our goaltenders. If you look at the 10 years that I've been here, we've always been a team that really takes pride in defending their goaltender, defending the net front, defending the zone. And so for me, that's one area where we're going to be more difficult to play against by playing our system, which will allow us to be successful.
Successful moving forward, and I'll start by saying this about what he said at the beginning of his comments was that, it was a tough 24 hours for him. Right? It's been a tough 24 hours for the coaching staff because they feel partially responsible for the situation that they're in right now. And so Joe Sacco takes over. He's got head coaching experience. He mentioned that and talked about being a much younger man when he was in Colorado and learning from that experience, also learning from his experience on the bench for the past decade or so with the Boston Bruins. But the one thing that stood out to me, and I'll let you speak to what stood out to you, Judd. But the one thing that stood out to me is what he learned from his time in Colorado. Talking about, I was focused on the game plan. I was focused on the execution, but I wasn't as much focused on the personal relationships with the players. And that's something we referenced Jim Montgomery. He was a good communicator, focused on the relationships. That's something that Sacco is going to do moving forward.
It'll be interesting to see how Joe is able to build that into his coaching style. Listen, he is regarded as one of the best assistant coaches around the National Hockey League, and a guy who has head coaching experience, as you mentioned, with the Colorado Avalanche, a guy who's been in the mix for a handful of jobs here over the last few years, but just hasn't found the right opportunity. And he hasn't been hired by a general manager around the National Hockey League. That doesn't mean he's qualified or not qualified. That means he's a guy that's looked to as a guy who could right the ship for a lot of teams. I know there are some teams out there that gave him good, long looks, and I think that there was a really good opportunity for a few of those teams where Joe was going to end up behind the bench. But that said, here's where the opportunity is. And, he's a Medford guy. I don't think, because he had such a good relationship with Monty, and you mentioned the word he brought up, bittersweet. Listen, he has the utmost respect and a really good relationship for Jim Montgomery, but he also has the opportunity to step behind the bench with his hometown team, the Boston Bruins, and try to lead this team where they need to go. And I think he's starting with the right thing. The other thing that he mentioned that he talked about, and I've heard other coaches talk about this, Adam, is that he wanted to focus on being stingy, but he also wanted to elevate the work ethic. He said it's been there. It hasn't been to the level it needs to be. And then if the Bruins are able to do this, and that's the thing with skill, it only comes out and it really shows when the work ethic is there. And I think if the Bruins can start to bring that on a more regular basis and play the way he's hoping to, and that's being a stingier team, they're going to check a lot better. If you check a lot better, you're going to have the puck a lot better. And if you have the puck a lot more often, guys like David Pastrnak, Brad Marchand, some of the skill guys on the team, then their skill will be able to come out if they're able to do that. But it's got to start with the work ethic that they bring, and it has to be 5-man units all the time.
Work ethic, compete level, that's something that we've heard from the players as well in the start of the season as the Bruins have started 8-9-3 through the first 20 games of the year. And I was looking back to, there's obviously precedent in recent history with the Bruins making a coaching change during the season, and that was, of course, when the Bruins moved on from Claude Julien and brought in Bruce Cassidy, who was already on the bench as an assistant coach, and of course was a head coach down in Providence and had familiarity with the players. And that was actually, Judd, I remember that day pretty well because it was Patriots parade day. in the city of Boston after they had won the Super Bowl. A couple hours before that, the Bruins had announced that they had made a coaching change, and I was actually hosting parade coverage here at Nesson on the desk. And all of a sudden, we go from Patriots beat writers and former Patriots players to transitioning to bringing in our Nesson Bruins team. And so we brought in Jack, we brought in Brick, we brought in Dale, and we had a conversation about the coaching change. But, at the time, just to look back on it, the Bruins were 26, 23, and 6 when they made the move. And they went 18-8-1 the rest of the way and made the postseason. Ended up getting knocked out in the first round against the Ottawa Senators. But that sort of carried over into the following season, where they, I think there was a 50-win season, for the Bruins. So it's something that can provide a jolt, and not necessarily because the coaching is so much better, but it has to do with the fact that, what you're hearing, right? You're hearing from the players. We let Jim Montgomery down. Right? We have to take more pride in what we're doing on the ice. And so maybe it's a time of self-reflection too, for these players to sort of look in the mirror and say, hey, I got to be better. And if they do that to a man, maybe you see the results.
Definitely. But thinking back to that 17-18 season, since you brought it up, and that was Bruce Cassidy's first season.
Yeah.
I remember it took a while for that team to get a little traction. Basically, by the middle of November, the Bruins were kind of hovering around 500, and the team was out west. I remember they lost the game in Anaheim. The following night, they were in Los Angeles. They won that game. It was a tight checking affair, and it took a while for the Bruins to find their identity, and then they started to take off, and that was a pretty young team. But the other thing that you bring up, listen, this hasn't happened in 9 years for the Bruins, where they've changed a coach midstream. Now, remember the year before the change, if memory serves, Don Sweeney came on as the general manager in 2015. So you had a change at the top.
Right.
And he kept Claude Julien on as the coach. And then there was a move that he felt he needed to make to bring Bruce Cassidy on. And that team was able to forge their way into the playoffs in the 16-17 season. Listen, I don't think any general manager likes to do this. I think where I'm going with this is any team that is successful in the National Hockey League over a long period of time, they don't like to make changes. They just don't. Those are the teams around the National Hockey League. When I think about the Edmonton Oilers, for years it was a coaching carousel. It was a GM carousel. Think of the Buffalo Sabres, all the changes that they've had. And the residual effect that it has on the players, in the organization, everything that you do. If you don't have that type of stability, you have a hard time being successful. So I think for Don Sweeney, this was not a move that he wanted to make. I think he understands how important stability is. He understands Jim Montgomery's a good coach, but at the same time, this is a move that he felt like he had to make. But teams that make a lot of changes with coaches, teams that make a lot of changes with general managers, etc., those are the teams that typically don't find their way into the playoffs on a regular basis, and that's something the Bruins have done here over the last 8 or 9 seasons.
And so Chris Kelly, Jay Leach, Bob Asenza remain on the bench, and they may look to see if they want to add moving forward, maybe another coach on the bench. But right now, that is the coaching staff of the Boston Bruins, and Joe Sacco is going to start as interim head coach. Well, he started on this day, but his first game will be Thursday in Utah at home as the Bruins finish their homestand. So 20 games in, 4 games until Thanksgiving. Of course, that's always what we look at, right? Over 75% of the time, teams who are in playoff position at Thanksgiving make the postseason. So we'll see how the Bruins respond after the head coaching change